You didn't work this hard, earn this title, and build this much experience just to feel bored. Welcome to The Boardroom, the podcast for senior leaders who are accomplished, capable, and quietly craving more. I'm Mark, your Chief Career Officer. And every week, we unpack real stories from leaders who have made bold moves. Plus, I'll give you practical strategies to help you take ownership of the next chapter in your career. If you're done drifting and you're ready to move forward with clarity and intention, you are in the right room. Hello, everybody. We are joined today by Farrell Simon, the Chief Commercial Officer at Trevi Therapeutics and a leader known for turning big biotech ideas into real-world impact. Farrell's career has taken him from Procter Gamble to Pfizer, where he served as Chief of Staff to the Biopharma Group President before stepping into commercial leadership at Trevi. He holds both an MBA and a PharmD from the University of Florida, and he's also the founder of the Simon Cancer Foundation. Above all, Farrell brings a mix of strategic thinking, curiosity, and a genuine passion for improving patients' lives. Farrell, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I want to get to know you deeper than like a bio, right? Like I want to know the real story of your career, not like the boiled down LinkedIn version. Talk to me about like how you have evolved in your career over time.
A little bit is planning and a little bit is luck. I think as I started off, one of the big things was, right, you go to college, you select a major, and you have the big book back when there were books, not online sorting of majors. And I always wanted the business side of science. And so that led me down this path. I think it was a really unique path of getting my PharmD and MBA. And from there, what I always looked at was how do I use those as transferable skills in the real world? And it started off at Procter Gamble. There I learned a great deal about brand building, general management, financial responsibility, and modeling, and then was able to parlay that over to Pfizer in a consumer healthcare space and worked on some just overall great equities, great brands over the years. And the one I always call out was Chopstick, a brand that everybody knows and loves, but
I have one in my pocket right now.
Yeah, and I hope you have the real brand name, and you're not like holding like a Burt's Bees or something else. But it's an equity that everybody knows, but it's a category generic. And one of the things we were able to do in my time there was turn around the brand from a stagnant, if not declining, to a double-digit growth for a number of period of years. And we simplified the business, we changed the positioning of the product, and I think it all got back to the fundamentals I learned at Procter & Gamble about, it's about customer first. So in consumer healthcare, the customer, the shopper. In pharma, it's about the patient. And how do you put them at the center of everything? And then what are the insights that really drive you to change your behavior, to change their behavior, to take a different action? So from there, I was able to nicely transition back into pharma, and it was probably the second phase. It was a thoughtful career pivot about going back into pharma. I wasn't using my pharm degree as much as I was, and I wanted to get back to my scientific roots, and then worked on a couple of great equities in pre-commercial development, commercial stage companies in different geographies. I worked on brands like Eliquis before, as you mentioned, stepping into a chief of staff role, which was one of the, I think, the most pivotal times of my career. Right? As I say, it's a little bit of planning and a little bit of luck. That was a little bit of luck. There's not many times that comes available, and it's a very competitive type position to get into. And what I learned there was just how management operates. How do you set strategy at a company level? But then had a lot of core responsibilities that I was able to take in terms of managing operating plans on a $40 billion P&L across 7 business units, looking at launch excellence. How do we do things differently in different business units and standardize not every process, but share the learnings so that we're always optimizing, we're always doing things better. Ran the earnings messaging and process for the biopharma unit, which was great in terms of I wasn't delivering it, but I was understanding the businesses to the depth and level that needed to be had so that we can project that externally to our investors and shareholders to give them confidence in the business. And then other strategic initiatives. But then, I guess a transition to the third phase of my career, which was jumping into biotech. Always had the question of, I know you can work big, P&G, Pfizer, great, but can you work small? And once again, that was, a little bit of being in the right place at the right time and having the right leader take a chance on me and saying, I see the qualities that you can do, and that successfully made my transition over to Trevi. And so we, jumped in. I jumped in with both feet, and was at a time that was probably inopportune. Middle of COVID, was having a second child, and we moved up to Connecticut out of New York City. So why not throw everything in the air and see what sticks? And luckily, all three stuck. And title doesn't probably encapsulate what you do at a small company. We're 35 people. We have great clinical data. We're on a roll here, and we hope to continue that. But I do pre-commercial planning. I lead corporate comms. At times, I've led CMC and project management and touched clinical development in different ways. And you help out where you can. And I think it takes a certain personality and a certain type of attitude in order to be successful in those environments. Those are not all captured on my profile, but it tells you a little bit more behind the story.
That's fascinating. Okay, I have 100 questions, of course. I want to go all the way back to the beginning, though, with this idea of like your MBA and your PharmD. Were there many people doing that at the time? Like, how did you decide that pairing was going to work and bring you to where you wanted to be?
I didn't know it would bring me to where I wanted to be. I just knew I had a passion for science and a passion for business. And I started off in the scientific track and going to the pharmacy program, which is a 4-year graduate program. And then you had to apply to business school. And luckily, I chose a school that did have that option. But no, there weren't a lot. There was a maximum really of one in every single class, if that. I was lucky enough to have some mentors before me who had went through that program and helped guide me through how I should think about the opportunities. But when I had my first set of job offers coming fresh out of college, they spanned everything. I mean, the most interesting job offer I had was re-engineering the California State Prison Chain Pharmacy on a 4-year contract, to industry positions, to health reimbursement and market access companies that it was at its infancy in the time. And so there was a lot at my disposal. I was lucky to have a couple of offers on the table. In talking, once I got the offer from Procter Gamble, I knew that was a great training ground and that they invest in you. And that was the one that I chose to take.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I was going to ask how you made that decision with so many offers on the table. It made me think of, I was listening to a podcast with the actor Jenna Fisher, who was Pam on The Office back in the day.
Yep.
And I deal with this a lot with folks who have multiple opportunities like that, where they go, what do I choose and which way do I go with all of this? And it was really interesting. And I give this exercise to people a lot of times. I say, like, I want you to follow your passion. And the example that she gave was after The Office, she got a lot of great job offers, right? Like all these different opportunities. And so she would actually flip a coin, not to let the coin make the decision for her, but she said that there's a lot to be said for what happens internally in your gut. Even when you flip a coin, you say, heads, I take the role, tails, I don't. And there's that moment of reveal when you look at the coin. She said if her stomach dropped, that probably says something. If she got really excited, that probably says something. And so it sounds like you kind of had that like moment of reveal with Pfizer being like, oh, training ground, like this is a good opportunity for me. Was that kind of your decision-making process?
It was, you didn't know what you didn't know, right? I grew up in Florida. The pharmaceutical industry wasn't widespread in Florida, and nor were they recruiting from Florida. And so that has luckily changed over the years. But I wanted to be in Florida, New York, or California, and I ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I think one of my bosses there, and I didn't have this guidance at the time, but it's guidance that I provide a lot of people, is think of the next role. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of passion, Mark, about what you talk about, but it's also about how are the skills and competencies that I'm going to gain set me up for what's next in life. And it's a guiding principle that I've used for almost every role I've looked at and taken over the course of my career. I also employed something very early on in my career that I interviewed every 2 years in my career externally. And it was hard. I haven't done that in the last 5 years since I've been here. But it was a good kind of check of, am I getting and building the skills needed to be externally valuable? And it sometimes enlightened me in terms of the roles in which I should be taking internally. And I stayed at Pfizer for 10 years. I stayed at Procter for a couple of years prior to that. But it gave me the insight to understand what skills do I need in order to advance in my career, no matter where that might be.
Well, and I like that idea too of kind of setting yourself up for the next role. This is a an exercise that I do with a lot of my coaching clients. Is I'll say, "What does retirement look like for you? Are you on boards? Did you start a foundation? Like you have the Cancer Foundation. Like, did you start a foundation? What is your legacy here that you ultimately want to achieve?" Some people are chasing impact. Some people are chasing money. Whatever that is fine. I just want to be clear about it because then you can work backwards from there and find those stepping stones that say this is how you get to that ultimate goal. So like I have a client who, was like a chief design officer, and his ultimate goal is to just retire on paid board positions and to be as valuable as possible. Well, he was with one company for 25 years, a really large financial institution, which is great. But he said, I have to get into not only like out of this company, but into a different industry so that I have multiple perspectives to bring to boards in 15, 20 years when I want to be on paid board positions. And so really setting yourself up like that is really vital. And like you said, can also then stretch you to go, okay, like I need to see myself in a different light. I need to develop different skills. So has that changed the definition of success for you as you've like moved through the stages, all these 3 stages of your career?
It always went back to me for impact, right? Impact and philanthropy. And you talk a little about the foundation that I run. It's a not-for-profit foundation. I started it because my father suffered from cancer. He passed shortly thereafter from it, but I started it when he was still alive, and I kept it in his honor. We give college scholarships to those students who are cancer survivors or have cancer going to college. And we've distributed over $200,000 in the 20 plus years that we've been around. And it's actually changed my viewpoint on what that end goal is. And it's evolved over time. And I think it's always great. Like you go through these training classes. I went through the Stephen Covey 7 Habits training, and you had to write like exactly what that vision was and what do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years, or what's your vision? Mine's changed, and that's okay by me. But I want to take roles in which I can drive impact, that I'm helping patients in different ways, and that I set myself up for a philanthropic retirement. And that is not just with my foundation, but in other ways, in terms of giving back, in terms of my time, in terms of donations and supporting organizations that we're passionate about. And one of the jokes I made, I was talking to College of Pharmacy this past week, to the dean there. And, the question came back to me from one of the individuals was, what does that look like to you? Like, what got you started? And I joked to them. I said, look, I want to start almost an investment committee at home for charitable giving. I want my kids to research something, to determine something that they're passionate about and want to help in life, and then come and talk to my wife and I about, here's how I want to support them. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to contribute. And here's what I look for you to contribute. And it's setting them up to, number one, hopefully be good humans and be kind to others and be thoughtful about it, but really help them understand what charity is and what philanthropy is so that they can instill that in their life moving forward.
Wow, that is one of the coolest ideas I've ever heard. That is incredible. Okay, so all this like the philanthropy like that, like that's the legacy that you'll leave behind, which is the coolest thing that I think most people aspire to, and you're actually doing it. Because you talked about how that definition of success has changed over time. Like, how did you know when it was time to dive in to creating a foundation or to investing in charitable things? Like, because it's scary, right? Like any change, even if it's a change for good, is sometimes terrifying. So how do you make those decisions and know when it's time versus when it's too early?
So I guess I can start with the foundation, right? Like the Simon Cancer Foundation, how I thought about that, right? My dad was diagnosed. We had a lot of conversations on it. And I always heard people say, well, I want to do something about it. And a lot of the time, like that's money. And at the time I was in grad school and didn't have the money to make that type of impact. And so I said, well, but what can I do? And I was always somebody of action. And so how do I make a foundation in an area of high unmet need where there may be a gap? My parents have always instilled in me a higher education in terms of just being dedicated in that area. And how do I mend those two together into something that honors my father, but also is an area that can help the students where they need them the most. They get through their journey, their bills are high. They may not be able to afford tuition. They may not be able to afford books. And we're not at the stage we can provide full tuition, but we're offsetting a proportion of that for them and for, call it 8 to 10 students every single year.
Wow. Okay, so where can people find out more about the foundation?
Our website, thescf.org, is our website. We just ended our scholarship for this year, so I'm now compiling all the applications and getting the scholarship committee together, and we'll figure out what the distribution looks like for this year. But it has always changed, and I think that was the real start for me in defining giving back and how do I give back to causes that I'm passionate about. And then, just over the course of, I think, my life and my career of interacting with people who are inspiring and inspiring us to do better and inspiring us to just reach that next level.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask about this too, because you talked about even like your parents kind of mentoring you and kind of teaching you. You're doing the same for your kids. But then you've also talked a couple of different times already in less than 20 minutes about mentors and people who invested in you and all these things. Have you found like really formal mentorship? Is it informal? Like, how did you find those relationships? And because they've brought you to where you are today. These are massive time investments in you that have changed the trajectory of your career. Like, how do you get mentors? Because the best leaders that I see always talk about, I learned from this person. I emulated somebody. It's always passing. So how did you find those?
So some of them naturally come by because they're your managers, right? And I've been lucky to have some great managers over the course of my career who have mentored me and continue to mentor me even, after I've left their organization. I think others you have to seek out through formal or informal means. And I think finding people with a commonality is what's key. And so there's programs in which, we invest in. I invest in something called Pioneer Collective, which is more culture, curated connections who have just expanded my network and have been doing a great job of really being thoughtful about who can be mentors, who can be helpful in careers, but just people to know, to expand networks. And then informally, it's a lot about networking. And as much as people like it or hate it, it has to occur. And, it's about bringing people together. And I think even in our community in Connecticut, it's not known for biotech, but we have a ton of biotech leaders here. And how do we bring those people together in different ways, whether that's through, a Connecticut-wide event or whether it's through our local communities and culturing those connections and then, paying it forward. And so when you see two people, oh, you should be talking to this person, this is going to be a great mentor. People that I've known have done that for me as well. And I think it's just always keeping those people in mind so that you can help them achieve what their goals are and align them with their success metrics.
Yeah. Are you in the love it or hate it camp of that, like, not necessarily forced networking, but like intentional networking?
I hate it.
You really?
I may not seem it. I'm a natural introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do it out of necessity. And look, it's fun. I find it's fascinating to learn about people and their backgrounds and how they got to where they are and what they're doing in life and driving impact. But to me, as my background, like, it's draining to me. So being at an event like JP Morgan at the beginning of the year for 3, 4, 5 days, I think we were there for 4 days this year, it's exhausting. So you need a little bit of time to recharge on the back end of that. But I know how important it is. And it's not only networking for professional reasons, it's networking for personal reasons as well. And you just have to make sure you're present, as much as it doesn't sacrifice the work-life balance that you want for yourself.
That's huge. Honestly, in coaching, I deal with a lot of people who hate networking. I love networking because I did the Myers-Briggs a couple of years ago and tested like 91% extroverted. It's like not shocking. I have the same personality type as Oprah Winfrey. So, I love it and I think it's amazing. And it's been a challenge for me to like basically teach introverted folks
Mhm.
how to engage in networking without stressing themselves out.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought this up because it's the number one thing I tell people to do is I say, you don't have to worry about talking about yourself. People love to talk about themselves. When
Mhm.
you're in a network situation, just ask people about them and to keep the conversation going. And you end up
Yeah.
learning a lot about them. You're investing in other people. And this is the thing that I see that is really different between folks like you and folks
Mhm.
who feel like they're getting stuck a little bit and like can't advance like up into like VP or into the C suite
Yeah.
is with you, I see a very much outward focus. And you've done this several times, even today during this conversation, but from what I've known from you before too, is that you go, well, let's put the patient at the center of everything. Let me walk
Mhm.
into networking focusing on other people.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that I'm giving back to those who are in need. It's so external focused.
Mhm.
And I think that's what kind of unintentionally almost makes you a really, really good leader is that you're not focused on what can I get out of this? How will this benefit me? Now, does it benefit you? Ultimately, yeah, the
Yeah.
networking benefits you, the foundation benefits you. But ultimately, you're doing this because you're investing in others. And the best managers, the best leaders that I see are ones who invest in other people above all else. And there's like such a beauty to that that is exciting
Thank
to
you.
see in somebody like you.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, you either you either can go through people or bring people along and build them up. And I think the more exciting path, of course, is building them up, training them so that they can be successful in their own unique way. And I sometimes where leaders fall short is they always try to do it their way. And so that individual has to do it their way or else it's not the right way. And I think
Mhm.
being open-minded and actually actively listening, which is a really hard thing to do. Uh, I struggle with that with telling my kids to do this and they're at a young age, but I'm like, you need to listen without trying to react. And the
Yeah.
more you can do that across all of life, I feel the more richness you get out of it because you're actually making true connections instead of uh, trying to solve a problem at every second.
Yeah. Okay, when did you learn that though? Because, like you said, you've had these different phases of your
Mm.
career. You've made intentional changes, right? Like getting back into pharma was an intentional
Yeah.
shift for you. Was this like a long-term lesson? Was there like a moment where you learned that lesson? How did that
There
develop
was
in you?
probably a moment, a key moment in my transition from Procter Gamble to Pfizer. And in that moment, what ended up happening was when I first started in that transition, so I was at Pfizer after being at Procter for a number of years, I kept relying on the fact that, oh, this is how they do it at Procter. And I got some harsh feedback, right? On you're walking a line between arrogance and confidence, and you're walking a line in terms of knowing what the way is without really understanding what the problem may be. And it was great feedback. And I luckily really took it to heart, internalized it, and was grateful for my manager for just being honest and transparent about what was going on. And then I had to change. It wasn't an overnight, like I tried not to. I actually shifted the other way. I actually shifted to being completely quiet.
Huh.
So in meetings, I wouldn't give opinions anymore because I was scared that my opinions were going to come off as arrogant or whatever else it may be or misinterpreted from what my intent was. So I went and the pendulum swung and then I had to find that right balance. So it took a little bit of time to find that right balance and eventually it did come, but it was really because of some great people giving some honest feedback and hard feedback that helped set me on that right path.
That's really interesting. I like that you did internalize, and I also like that it wasn't a perfect process, right? Like
No, it was
it
a
never
messy
is.
process. Because in six
That's
months it was like,
fantastic.
well, why are you not saying anything? And it's like, well, you told me not to say anything. And it's like, well, that's not what we meant. And I'm like, well, oh, okay. Well, then let's find the right balance.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a thing that I have been learning a lot recently too. I'm in a course right now through the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches, and I'm in a certified interview coach class right now. We're like a little more than halfway through. And one of the really hard things to do is to find the balance in myself between coaching and teaching, right? Because the teacher side of me wants to just like fix all the problems and just be like, do it this way. But that's not how people learn and grow the majority of the time. People learn and grow when I coach rather than teach. And so finding that balance in myself has been hard. And it's really similar to what you're describing of like finding that right balance. And I pendulum swing myself and have to realize like, okay, what does this individual need too? So sometimes that approach has to change based on the situation where you might have to be more opinionated one time than the next, even if you're dealing with the same type of situation. It's not easy all the time.
It goes back to a class I took in a training at P&G, which was situational leadership. And there were two classes that I want to talk about. That's one of them. And we'll come back to the other. But it was all about to the task, not even the individual, because it was two scales, and I'm not going to remember perfectly, but it was motivation and competency. So, Mark, on task A, you're motivated and you're competent. I let you go. I forget what what you call that box on the 2x2, but you're fine to then go, and I can just kind of give you simple directions and sit back, and I know you're going to do a great job because you're competent and motivated. But someone who's competent but not motivated, how do you coach that individual? And there's different techniques by task, because you may be really strong in resume writing, but if you're talking about interviewing, you may need more coaching in interviewing versus resume writing. So for me, it's more task related than even individual related. And the other class, which I go back to 90% of the time in my career, was a class called Leadership on Paper. It's a writing class. There's a 3-day, and as I said, P&G invests in people. They invest more in people, in training and development, and I was severely grateful for it. But it teaches you how to communicate. And everybody goes, well, I know how to communicate. It taught you how to write a memo and how to write what is a recommendation? What is the background? What am I actually recommending? What's the rationale? And what are some of these alternatives that I've considered? And it's helped me contextualize situations where you have to take a bunch of complex information and simplify it for a team or to drive to a decision. And I've used that in some meetings. I've taken things that have swirled in organizations for months and said, here's the issue, let's have a discussion, but here's the recommendation from the team that I've talked to, and here's the alternatives, and this is why we think it's the best path forward, and this is the spend. And it's taken that broad churn and drove it into action. And I go back to it, but it's two of the best trainings that I've taken across my career that I keep coming back to time after time.
That's really cool. We've spoken about this before, that kind of that superpower of yours is taking things that have been stagnant for a while and no one really knows what to do and making it work and pushing things forward and all of that. And this is really interesting because, and it's almost maybe a little bit paradoxical, but like at a middle management level, you are a lot more task focused, right? Project focused. We're doing this one thing. When you get to that upper level C-suite type of leadership, the impact is at the enterprise level. And so you're a little bit less likely to, obviously you're not as likely to go in and execute maybe at a 35-person business. But, how do you find that balance then between going, okay, like, here's how to do it, go do it, versus like, let me just do it because you're not doing it. Like, have you found that to be a challenge?
Well, it's a principle I go back to in terms of signaling of like, are we being expansive in our thinking? Like, is this like the brainstorming of where we're coming up with ideas, or is this the time in which we have a deadline and we need to meet the deadline? And I think you have to figure out where you are in that process. But there's always the friction I found in my career of going from the executor to the strategy lead. And it's one of these that goes like this. And as you go up in your career, execution gets lower, strategy gets higher. But no one ever coaches you on how to make that transition. And it came for me when I was applying for jobs internally at Pfizer and I was interviewing and, I was talking about how I can execute and how I can operationalize stuff and how I can do this. And the feedback I got was, you didn't show us how you were a leader. And I'm like, well, I thought you would have not assumed it, but like seen that from how I've led teams or cross-functional teams or matrix teams to drive results. But it's the way in which I was describing the situations and the way in which I was showing up, which wasn't seen as leadership at the time. And so for me, and you see probably the consistent theme across my career, it's like, what is the feedback that I'm getting? And how do I be genuine to myself, but change my approach so that it can help me achieve that next level of growth and understanding?
I have what may be a little bit of like almost a philosophical question here,
Yeah.
but like, so you say that, you take feedback to heart and then you adjust. Do you think the ability to do that, that level of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
is that intrinsic to an individual or can that be taught?
I think you have to ask a bunch of psychologists or somebody else other than me about population health and whether or not that's intrinsic. But
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of both. And it's a little bit of how motivated the individual is. I
To that
do,
chart you talked about before.
I do see that there is a certain level of EQ naturally intrinsic in individuals. Can you still grow it even if it's not naturally intrinsic to you? I think you can. But I don't think it's kind of like what we talked about in networking. It probably comes more naturally to some people, but others can learn it. And it's all about their motivation to learn.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and it reminds me, I have a client who wanted to work at a pretty high up position at Amazon and was talking about there was like some type of system that they used that was like a require, like we want somebody with experience using this system.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I've never even seen what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about it in coaching and I was like, well, I mean, it's a system. Go out there and find some training on it, right? Like do a LinkedIn learning or find it on YouTube for all I care, right? Like you go learn about it at least so that you can walk in and talk about it rather than saying, no, I do not have this experience. Mm-hmm. And so he did, I think like a 5-hour training on it or something. And so when he walked into that interview, he was able to say, you know what? Never used it before, but I knew it was important to this role. And so I went on, I did a whole bunch of training. So do I know what it looks like? Yeah. Do I know how it functions? Absolutely. Do I know basic functions? For sure. Now, give me a couple of days on it. Let me play around with it when I get in the job and I'll be good to go. You won't have to worry about me. Yeah. And when they hired him for that job, they said, we cannot train that level of initiative into a person. Yeah. That we had people who knew things way better than you did, but we gave you the job because we can't train that level of intrinsic motivation into other people. And so I thought it was a really cool testament to like, and I mean, maybe you've even seen this before. I'll actually be interested to know this, but like, you don't even have to be the most qualified person going out for a role in order to land that role. And that was one of the ways that he did that. Has that ever been the case for you that you felt underqualified, but still got the job anyway?
It probably going into the chief of staff role, right? Mm-hmm. To be honest, it was about it. You couldn't check every box.
Yeah,
it's impossible because you would have had to work in every single business unit and every single function, and like it's impossible to check the box. So was I fully qualified for that? No. Did I do my homework like crazy and they had a case with it? Did I follow the case to a T and solicited external feedback and made sure that I showed up as best I can? Absolutely. But I think that was one of the roles that was, you show up and yeah, I had motivation to do it. I had a reason why. And, I was willing to put the effort forward. And it's not to say others weren't, but I think I displayed it in a way that got me the job.
And, that level of messaging, the ability to communicate that type of value, is huge. And this is where people, I don't know what you want to call it, make a mistake, but so many people put themselves into a box and then will not venture outside that box for fear of not being perfect. Mm-hmm. And I say, take the chance, stretch yourself and see what happens. Because the worst thing that's ever going to happen is somebody goes, pass.
Well, and I used to do a lot of work, still do with students at my college at the University of Florida. And one of the biggest things in mentoring some of them, particularly the pharmacy students, was don't think about your degree as the letters. Think about your degree as a set of transferable skills. So what does your degree give you? It gives you ability to analyze complex information. It gives you the mend of scientific understanding and simplicity. It gives you, understanding how do you think about a variety of options and figuring out the best solution. It gives you all these things that you have in school, but if you say it in a different way, you're going to come across companies in a very different manner than if you just say, I have my PharmD. And I think it's how people think about their backgrounds, but I'd rather bet on somebody than bet on their qualifications.
Yep. Every time. Well, and this is the thing too that happens so frequently because of the way that the pipeline works in the hiring process. If the thing that you do is a click, 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 and then like wait to see what happens, that story doesn't always translate, right, on paper to someone in HR who doesn't really know the job. That networking piece, to bring it back to that, like that networking piece is then huge because suddenly I'm on the top of the stack of resumes on your desk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I can get in with the chief commercial officer and explain how my skills
Yeah.
transfer, that's way better than handing my resume to an internal recruiter and waiting to see if I'm good enough or not on paper.
Yep.
And so, I mean, how many of your jobs, because you talked about like interviewing every 2 years, was that just like cold applications? Were you interviewing because you knew somebody? How did like each of those typically come along?
Cold applications at the time. Uh,
Yeah.
it wasn't really like the LinkedIn era of
Right.
jobs being posted. I'm dating myself a little bit because of that, but you kind of searched on their forums and you set up job alerts and you got the
Yeah.
job alerts and you figured out what you wanted to do and what you wanted to understand. And it wasn't interviewing to waste their time. It was interviewing because it was an interesting opportunity and I wanted to make sure, is that something in which I wanted to pursue over where I was today? And, I have a huge respect for people's time and like it were all opportunities in which I would have taken if the circumstances were right.
Yeah. Well, and there's strategy and intentionality in that too, right? I
Hmm.
think that I say this constantly. So many people let their careers happen to them rather
Hmm.
than owning it
Yeah.
and pushing themselves to where they want to be. Like I mean, you made a really intentional move out of pharma back into pharma. Like you said, those
Hmm.
weren't arbitrary. But I find that most of the clients that I work with they walk up to me and they kind of go like, I'm 50 and hate this.
Yeah.
I'm like,
What do I
wait,
do
how
now?
did you get here? And they're like, well, I kept getting promoted and I kind of
Hmm.
just ended up here. Like, I'm successful. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
It's, I don't love this and I don't
Yeah.
really know why I'm dissatisfied. And
Yeah.
so we get to work through all of those things. But like my goal for people, and I don't even know how to like make this happen in the world, but my goal for people is that they do that in like their 20s and 30s and not wait until they're 20 years into a career that just isn't the right fit. Because if we're talking motivation and competency, you're suddenly really competent in a very specific area, but not motivated. And in another area, you might be really motivated and excited, but have zero competence. And so then you're at this impasse where making a shift means a big demotion or something, right? Like feeling like you're starting over.
Hmm.
But for you, I don't know that, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you never really felt like you were starting over because
A
you were
little,
doing this
actually,
intentionally.
a little bit when the move from consumer healthcare back into pharma. Because all these individuals that were at my level were like, well, I've been in pharma for 10 more years than you. And I'm like, well, that's great. I said the same concepts still hold true. You have a patient, you have an insight, whether that's a patient, a physician, a payer. You have an insight that's a driving force behind each of them. And you have commercial, medical, and market dynamics. Great. That's the same in consumer healthcare that it is in pharma, that it is in service industries. Like the same construct that I was born and raised with at Procter holds true in almost any situation.
Yeah.
The question, what I've seen is not only just the stagnation and motivation from an individual, but the stagnation to keep up with external trends. And that's where I think this integration of AI, I find it vastly motivating. I use it for 50% of my job, not to do the job, but to have a starting place. Give me a better starting place. Give me a quick answer. And, you know, starting to take classes on then how do you prompt better? How do you code in Python? How do you do these things that you think of like, well, why are you doing that at your stage of your career? And I'm like, number one, it's really interesting, and I want to kind of see what it can do. But two, I think it can help us be better at our jobs and not take away our jobs, but complement what we're doing to make better decision making.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you've really embraced the AI.
Yeah.
Do you feel like others are doing the same, or do you feel like an outlier with this?
I think people are coming along. I think there are some that are absolutely embracing it. I feel like there are others who are trying to hold it off as long as possible. But I think it's almost like any scenario. Once you get a quick win on it, you're like, oh, this can do all of that in this short amount of time. Why would I not do it? Right? It doesn't mean you have to use it for every use case, but can you use it for two or three things within your job that just make it easier or quicker? So, and then you have to verify, trust but verify, and
Yes.
trust but verify. I do it. I do it on the sources that we get from it, and that's fine. But I can do it in a quarter of the time.
I love the trust but verify. I cannot tell you the number of times that AI will hallucinate things, and
Yeah.
I can't stop like I'm double checking against my notes. I'm like,
Mm.
I had it one time tell me that a client of mine, when I was asking for like a rundown about a specific skill set that they had, it was like fluent in Kurdish, and I was like, wait, what? I don't remember them saying that ever. I said, where did you get that from? It said, oh, you're right, that was a mistake. I'm like,
Interesting.
this is suspicious. I don't love it.
Yep. Yep.
Very strange. So I love that principle. So this is really interesting. So let me ask you this, and I want to kind of get a sense from you of kind of like mentoring this audience, right? People who may feel a little stuck in their careers. What is your few sentences advice to people to say you're at, point X, we want to get you to point Z.
Mhm.
How do people motivate themselves to move forward in their careers, to take that ownership? I mean, you've made some shifts. How do people make shifts? What's your advice?
I first say that it has to depend on your personal situation, right? Like a lot of this is, you know, what your risk tolerance is in what you're willing to do. And some people want to take more risks and some people don't. So it starts there, right? And some people unfortunately don't have the opportunity to take risks just because of their situation. But it's about exploring. There's nothing hurt from you exploring what you want to do and defining that, and sometimes figuring that out through a set of interviews or informational interviews. Go on LinkedIn. If you have a company that you're really interested about and you have no connections there, but you have one common connection, great. Ask for an introduction and just say, just like to learn more about the culture there. I'd like to learn more about how happy are you in not how happy are you in your job, but like what gets you motivated about your job and the position and what you're driving impact on in your role. And once you start opening up those doors, then you'll start to understand, oh, that's not the place I want to be. You'll start to narrow the mindset on here's where I really want to be, and then you can start a job search. I think some people jump into a job search way too prematurely, and then I think, Mark, as you said, they end up in a job, they end up getting promoted, they end up doing well, but they're just not happy. And so doing the diligence on the front end, on the industries, the companies, the people, will help narrow down what the job search should be, which should naturally follow that.
You are hired, because I want you saying that to every single. I deal with this all the time. 98% of the time when people come to me, they think they need a resume.
Mm-hmm.
And that is part of what they need, but absolutely not the entire thing. It is one, honestly, kind of small piece of what they actually need. And so 98% of the time, I refuse to do just resume work with people, because that's not what's going to get you into something that's satisfying and that is right for you. And like, unless there is like an incredibly clear, this is exactly what I want to do in the future, and there's already clarity there, I'm not doing just that resume writing with people, because we need to be more strategic, intentional, and robust with our strategy. And so I love that you're kind of shouting that out. That tells me that you're mentoring people in that direction too, which is so exciting. But I love that because that exploration phase can be so informative. Oftentimes will lead people down paths that they never let themselves consider because it seemed too far fetched. And then when they really start to explore, it doesn't seem as far fetched because now you're making connections. Now you know people. And when you invest in getting to know other people, people are more likely to invest back into you. And so that's where like that networking piece, the human connection comes into play in ways that people discount far too frequently. Just because you have to apply online doesn't mean you should only be applying online. And this is that proof, right? Like you start to narrow, you talk to people, and the job search ensues from there.
Well, and sometimes even applying online is, does that company favor internal applicant referrals? Right? Like understanding those dynamics, that's when you get to the job stage of how do you, yeah, you have a resume, great, and you've applied. How do you get it out of the stack of piles? I mean, now people are just clicking apply on LinkedIn to posts and they have hundreds, if not thousands of applicants.
Yeah.
How do you break through the mold? And it's one of the key things I've always driven throughout everything I've done is personalization. And there's no cookie cutter answer. Mark, we worked together in resume writing. You've done great things in terms of my background, but it's still not one size fits all, because depending on what you're going after, it needs to be tailored to your audience. And it's one of the key things that I always remember. I go back to some of the mentoring conversations I've had. There was, through my MBA program, there was a pitch competition for 30-second pitches that all the MBA students had to do to the advisory board, which I sat on. And I always remember the difference in some of them. One of them was pitching why they should be a good applicant for something like Target. And they talked and it was fine and it was great. And I said, here's the one difference. Target doesn't refer to the people who come into their stores as customers. They refer to them as guests. The more you talk the language of the company in which you want to apply, the more they will see you already in that seat. Yep. And that's a really concrete example that I've always used is personalization to know your consumer, know your company you're applying to, know the customer, like know your client, because then you'll make the stronger connection and you'll hopefully break through the mold of the noise of just applicants.
That's right. You have me smiling, like I'm nerding out right now about all of the life lessons that you're giving to people, because this is the things that I echo all the time. Very quickly, I worked in higher education for a while, and I was called communications coordinator. I was literally a one-person department underneath an executive director. I had no direct reports, zero power. I'm like 24 years old. Have absolutely nothing to do with hiring anyone ever. But because my name was all over the website, I would get emails that were like, I want to work in marketing. Well, super technically, I worked with marketing, but not for marketing. Yep. But if people would do certain things, if they would put my name on it, if their message was short and sweet and I wasn't reading a novel, and if they attached their resume, well, I have no power, right? But shout out to Molly Yoder, who is an amazing marketer and a senior C-suite level person. Molly at the time was the director of marketing. And I worked with her, and I have incentive for there to be good people in marketing. It makes my job easier because I work with them so much. Yep. So did they get the wrong person? Sure. But if they did those small things, and I really felt like it was sent to me on purpose rather than to whom it may concern. Like, my name is in my email address. You can't call me by name. If they kind of hit all of those things, I would forward that over to Molly and say, hey, this could be a good person for your team. And now that's how you cut through the noise. That person is on the top of the stack of resumes on Molly's desk. And what better way to land a job, even though they got the wrong person? I wouldn't even respond to that person most of the time, right? I'm busy. I got stuff to do. But that back end relationship oriented thing, it still works. So it's fascinating how some of these things happen that maybe people applying for new jobs don't even see what's going on.
It's true. I'll leave you with one last kind of anecdote.
Please do. Yes.
Of what a mentor taught me, and it's something I had a conversation with an individual last week on. Was there's a three-legged stool whenever you're in a job, in a current job, and I think this really holds true in any organization. It's called the pie model. It's quite simple. I learned it at P&G. Performance, image, and exposure. You could be a top performer in your organization, if you don't have the right image and you're not exposed to those cross-functionally or senior management, it doesn't have to be always be up. It can be, peers as well. No one's going to know who you are. So you're never going to really advance your career. Likewise, if you have great performance in an image but zero exposure, it's really hard to get recognized for the work in which you're doing, even though you may be doing it right and doing it all the right ways. So it's a three-legged stool that is really important in managing your personal brand, where you are today, and understanding how you manage it once you get into a new job and or new company, so that you have those three things in mind. And evaluating jobs. I've evaluated jobs and said, this is going to be a great job. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to be a single contributor with absolutely zero exposure, and I have no way out of this job. And I've declined them because I'm like, there's no way out.
Right.
And
you're not pigeonholing yourself.
You're not pigeonholing yourself. And so I've looked at that in different ways, in different scenarios. And that was some of those external offers that I got when I was interviewing externally, saying, it's a great job. It's really exciting, but I don't see growth from here.
Well, okay, we have to stop, because here's the thing. We could talk for another hour about personal branding and what that looks like. So Let's do this. Where can people connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yes, absolutely.
Beautiful. Love that. So we'll put Farrell's contact information for LinkedIn in the show notes. Reach out, make new connections. This is one of those things that I encourage people to do at all levels of their career, but make connections with people outside of your role, outside of your industry, because we never know where those connections can go. And all that I want to do in my life is connect people to other people and build this network and make things bigger and greater. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your story and talk about those experiences. This has been such a pleasure to get to reconnect and catch up with you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for spending time with me in the boardroom. If today's conversation sparks something for you and you want clarity on what comes next, visit theboardroom.net to book a reset session or to learn about upcoming leadership retreats. Your next move does not have to wait. I'll see you next episode.